Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What's everybody doing today?
Everything and all the things.
Last
Everything and
day of
all.
school.
Trying to stay somewhere where it's cool.
Yeah,
That's what I've been trying to do today. It's hot. I
it's
Mhm.
first
left.
of June. It's too hot for the 1st of June.
Well, that's exactly that was my theme for today. Um, I got a email this morning. I guess I'm not much of a Facebook person, but I got a Facebook post this morning from one of my fraternity brothers from NC State, and they were setting out sweet potato slips this morning down in eastern North Carolina. He's from down at, I guess he's Craven down in Newbern, and Bud Whitford. And I was thinking, man alive, they've been delayed because of rainy weather. You set out potato slips in 95-degree heat, they won't make it. As sandy as that soil is down there, it'll blister them. I don't know what he's going to, but I mean, you do what you have to do. But yeah, I mean, you don't expect on June 1st for it to be 100 degrees already. Um, here in the neighborhood in Lake Lure, they're out suckering tomatoes today, and it's rained so much the suckers on them are as big as my little finger. I don't know that they'll survive being suckered in 100-degree heat. I don't know. It's
Do you pull those things off?
um, when you plant commercial tomatoes, you put them on black plastic and you run drip irrigation underneath them. You stake them and then you twine them. But when they start growing, they have three main stems that come up off a tomato, and in the axle of each of those stems, they'll grow a sucker. And if you grow commercial tomatoes, you got a hand. You just take your thumb and clip them off. Just knock them out of the axle of that stem that comes out there. But now what happens is if you set them out and it rains, like it's rained here in Lake Lure, that's what I was talking about. Normally, you want them to be no longer than your little finger and about the size, not much bigger than a pencil lead. They were sucking them today. They were a foot long and as big as my little finger. I don't know that those plants will survive that, not in this heat, but we'll see. Some fellas look like they knew what they were doing. But, back when I was in that business, I don't know what I'd have done, but I don't know that I would have been out there sucking them in this heat today. But we'll see how it goes for them. I mean, they got a lot of them in this part of the world. I passed coming back and forth in. I passed two different. There's one patch in the bottom down here at the creek. They got 40 acres in that one that they're staking it. They got on plastic down there. They got 40 acres. Patch right out here around the corner from the golf course is about 10 and then on either side of the road, but that big bottom's got 40 acres in it. They have about 30 people working at one time out there with all the equipment. I tell you, it's very labor intensive. Very labor intensive. Is it time for us to start? Now, Savannah won't be with us tonight. She was with us last night. As I told you, I've got a Tuesday night class. Same thing. If you can't make it on Wednesday, join us on Tuesdays. If you feel the need to join us every week. Well, welcome back, everybody. This is Mels 603. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Let's look at our weekly schedule and see where we are. So this week we started looking at human resources. We talked about human resources last week, and you went out and you were talking to them. And so remember, the idea here is due process. Due process, federal law says you will do these things to make sure that you don't discriminate against anybody in hiring. But now what the federal law doesn't say is who in your district will do those things. It just says you will do these things. Now, that is the substance of due process, equal opportunity employment. We'll post the job for a certain amount of time. We'll do this, we'll do that. But the trick becomes in everybody's district, what do you do? Now, I know Gaston's is converting over to Oracle, but again, who the important piece at the school level is the procedural part of due process. Who is actually going to post the jobs? Who's going to make sure the jobs are there, that there is a job? You know, who's going to check the transfer portal? Who's going to check allotments to make sure that you didn't lose that position in an allotment last year? Who's going to do all that stuff to make sure that that is real? Who's going to advertise? Who's going to do reference checks? Who's going to check their transcripts? Who's going to do the background? Who's going to do all those things? That's what you got to figure out as a school administrator. This is what due process says our district will do when we hire somebody. Because remember, principals don't hire anybody, and neither do superintendents. The superintendent recommends to the board, but the board doesn't do any of that work. And it's according to what size your human resources department is as to how much of that work they do. And a lot of it falls, as you know, to the school level for you to do. And so, and as we talked about last week, you've got to remember that employee assistance comes into play at this as well. I'll stop my share. And we're going to talk about that for a minute. So how does employee assistance come into play with vacancies and hiring? Well, as I found out the hard way in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, as I told you, I inherited a person with a substance abuse problem that was documented. And so when she didn't come to work, I was going to dismiss her and create a vacancy for job abandonment. But unfortunately for me, the rules of our employee assistant in Charlotte-Mecklenburg is I could not do that. All we could do was put her on leave for 6 months. And then she just had to test negative for drugs or alcohol in order to come back. Now, so I didn't have a vacancy. What did that mean that I had to do during that period of time? I had to use a substitute. I thought it was going to be a vacancy. In most districts in the state of North Carolina, that would have been a vacancy. But because we had that provision in our employee assistance in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, I did not have a vacancy. It's not much fun trying to do substitute teachers for 6 months of a school year. I couldn't do a long-term sub. I had to do regular substitutes, the $55 a day deal. I couldn't even do a long-term sub. Now, all the best subs want to do long-term sub. And so it was just kind of catch as catch can. But that's how employee assistance plays into the hiring in your district. So not only is it you should know the basics of that, you should know who to refer people to for, leave and medical and treatment and counseling and all those things. I mean, we want to be humanistic, but you also better know what the rules are, because you get caught over, kind of like me, got caught straddling the fence there on this position where I couldn't do anything with it. And all I could do was hire a sub every day. Had to call it in every day and hire them, which was no fun. And so that's what you got to find out what your district does. I want to look before we go any further. Let me share my screen again. No, I won't share my screen, but I do want to stop my share. I want to exit full screen. Let me look at something right quick. Okay, so what I'm looking at And I really like this one. So I hope, don't be mad at me, Marcia, when I share this one. Get back here. Let me share my screen. All right, so Marcia did this one, and so this is relevant because obviously everybody in Gaston County does the same thing, but here's the one that she's got, and she was very, very methodical in the way she laid it out. How position opening, job announcements, those things, everything eventually will be housed in Oracle. I don't know how far along y'all in that process. And you talked about but PIP personnel within the district are priority obtaining candidates, interviewing process. I like this one. This is the thing that I really like that Marcia said. While doing interviewing and discussing candidates, my principal said something that stuck with me. We were debating a candidate and we had a lot of buts. And she said, if you have to make excuses for them now, they're not the one. I like that. When you're interviewing, if there's too many buts and ifs, then you have to move on. And then she has summarized that. So that's what we were looking for. So shout out to Marcia for the good job with that one. And so I want to pause for a moment. As I said, that caught my attention. I want to pause for a moment and talk about Colin's Good to Great. Many of you probably have heard of the book Good to Great from David Collins. Those of you who haven't, he uses it's basically an oversimplification, in my opinion, of the Getzel's-Guba social systems model, which is much more theoretically based. But basically, it talks about he talks about, you know, you got to get the right people and get them on the bus, get them in the right seat. But one of the things that I do like about Collins that he says is no hire is better than a bad hire. And that's what Marcia was referring to there. And that's one of the things that when we get short of teachers. Now, again, full disclosure, I've been married to the same woman for 37 years. I love her better than my next breath. And she's a teacher. I am not anti-teacher. She was a teacher curriculum specialist. She eventually ended up being a curriculum specialist, C&I person. But I'm not anti-teacher. But the notion here, as I was referring to with the situation I had when I was a junior high principal in Charlotte, if you make a bad hire, boy, it's just like, you know, you just hope it's an albatross around your neck. Sometimes it's a tire that somebody lights on fire around your neck. That's the notion. We get in such a hurry to hire people, and we follow through all the due process steps, but we don't stop and say, is this really the right fit? Is this really the right person? That's where we make our biggest mistakes. Is we have to make too many accommodations, or there's too many buts, or there's too many ifs, as Marcia pointed out. That's a wonderful statement. And I always, every semester, I talk to students about, yeah, you got to follow the due process and do the right thing, but if the right person's not there, don't feel obligated to hire somebody if the right person is not there, because it's really hard to get rid of bad people. It takes a long time. And sometimes, you know, and sometimes I hate to say this. Now, you know, full disclosure, the folks in your central office are, a lot of them are former colleagues of mine or personal friends. But, you know, the central office wants you to keep people because they don't like parents calling and complaining that there's a substitute in the room. You know that, right? That they don't like that. But so sometimes you have to keep people that you really shouldn't have to keep. And so the best way to get out of the swamp is don't get in it. You know, don't hire that person that you're having to make excuses about. Now, I know the folks over at the central office want you to. They want you to fill those positions. They don't want mama calling and complaining that, you know, that their obviously gifted child doesn't have a teacher in the classroom. You know, they're all gifted. If you don't believe it, just ask their mamas. You know, that my child is not getting what they're supposed to get. But I'm telling you, if you get a bad, if you get that bad feeling, if you know, now you say, well, Dale, how do you get that bad feeling? You're telling us all these wonderful things, you old geezer. You know, You don't have any hair on your head to stand up. No, but I still got some on my back. But you know what I'm talking about. You know when you get that feeling that this is not just the fit that you need. Don't discount that notion. Now, how you get that notion is you need some practice. And so I'd like to encourage you to see if your principal, if you're not in a position to sit on the interviews, I don't care if it's a custodian, try to get out and get your principal to let you do some interviewing or set in on some interviews. Let them give you a question to ask. Most of the time they have a formulaic series of questions. Let them have you read one of those questions. But you need to get in and see people in interviews. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at being able to pick up on people who are just not a good fit, that there may be potential trouble down the road. Now, full disclosure, I made one of the worst hires ever. Guilty. I told you that story. I hired a lady that was not a traditional undergraduate. She had gone back. She's what we call a DCP, a degree completion. She had a 2-year degree and raised a family and then went back and finished. And I hired her. She was close to 40 years old. And she was a crackerjack student teacher, and I hired her. And she was the worst teacher ever. She wasn't worth shooting. Now, I was completely fooled and had her in my building as a student teacher. But she was a terrible hire, absolutely awful. And then I had to get rid of her. That made it even worse. But she was just absolutely awful. So, sometimes you get fooled, but sometimes you get that feeling. But the point of the story is not the feeling. The point of the story is you got to do the work. Get in there, see these interviews, see the people when they're hired, how they work out. It's just repetition, folks, and you really need to be able to do that. So again, kudos to Marcia for a wonderful response to that question. Very thorough, very organized. Again, I love that notion of don't if you have to make too many excuses, don't hire them. Questions you have for me about hiring, folks, about the interviewing process. We had technical difficulties last week and we didn't get done as much as I'd like. But do you have any questions that you would like to ask about that process? Any comments you would like to make? Don't everybody talk at once. All right, so let's move on. What I want to do now is I want to, before we get into the content for tonight, which is exceptional children and intervention themes, what I want to talk about is two things, and then we'll get to that. First thing I want to talk about is the OMA. So let me share my screen and remind you again, I think we did a decent job covering the OMA last week. So let's look at that. OMA task and prompts. So for task 1, you know that you got, I posted that PowerPoint of master scheduling, all the things you're going to need. You know all those things and where they go. And you need your faculty handbook in addition to the things that I listed for you last week. So everybody should be good on task 1. Now, if you're not, you need to let me know. Remember, I'm your coach as well. If you've got a problem with task 1, if you have questions, things you don't understand, now would be the time to ask me about OMA task 1.
Dr. Lamb, I have a question because I wasn't here last week.
Okay.
Can you give me a breakdown again of everything that is needed to complete it?
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I wanted. That's what I wanted you to do. All right. So if you will go to OMA task and prompts, see this one that says master scheduling right here.
Mm-hmm.
If you open it up, it is a PowerPoint. If you will get past the title screen and that, right here are the things you need. Okay. This is what you need to be able to do OMA task 1. Your report card, your EVOS report, your school improvement plan, your master schedule, duty roster, supervision schedule, teacher working conditions survey, and your latest accreditation report. and you'll need probably your faculty handbook, because usually your faculty handbook contains your duty roster, supervision schedule, and master schedule. They're usually found in your in your handbook. And so the latest accreditation report, that's to help you with your external context of your community, like average income, average cost of a house, average education, those kinds of things. That first section of your accreditation report will put your community in context. Teacher working conditions survey, supervision schedule, master schedule. Now, as you know, you will also need to do, let me go back to that one. You will also need to do an audit of your special populations programs. Again, what are the audits? What are those? What are your special population programs? All right, let me stop my share and go back again. What are your special population programs at your school?
AIG, EC, ESL.
That's three. There's three more. So we've EC 504, AIG, ESL. What else? What are your other federal programs? Title I? Title One?
Title I reading teacher.
Yep. What about career and technical education? Yep. That would be a yeah. So EC 504, Title I, career and technical, AIG, ESL. And it doesn't matter what it's called. Now, also, so that's actually five. We count EC 504 as one. There is a sixth one you might have. And actually, in my other section, I have a person. Where is she from? She's from Rutherford County. She is in a Smart Start. There are still a few of those around. I don't know if there are any left in Gaston County or not. Who knows what a Smart Start is? There's still several in there. Well, actually, there are four. There are four left in Mecklenburg County. They are federal pre-K programs that have their own building. They're their own schools. They were called Smart Starts. They started back in the 1970s into the 80s. There's still Hickory Grove has one on the same campus as their elementary school that's just as big as their elementary school. Starmount has one. I mean, they have like 1,000 kids. They're a real school. Carver Center in Rutherford County is still a Smart Start, which is a federal. They have their own building, their own school. And so if you have one of those, that would be a special populations as well. If you have a federally funded pre-K program. Now, there's not very many of the standalone ones anymore, but some schools do have a Smart Start pre-K. That means that their pre-K program is funded. The version since the 1990s. Since the 1990s has been, they will pay for a pre-K at your elementary school. They've stopped building schools and putting in separate schools for pre-K, for Smart Starts. But there's a few of the old traditional ones still around, but you will need to find out if you have a pre-K at your building, is it state funded or is it a federal Smart Start? If it's a federal Smart Start one, then you have to do an audit of that as well. I don't know if there's any of those left in Gaston or not. But if you have a pre-K at your school, you better ask. So those are all. Now, what is an audit? What is an audit? Jordan, what's an audit?
Jordan is in me, Alex?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, I was just making sure. An audit is, to me, is where you do sort of an analysis of.
I'll call you Alex from now on. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. you do an analysis of pretty much all the moving parts of a program, and you find out what things work really well, what things may be missing, what things maybe needed to be added. When I think of audit, that's what I think of.
Alex is exactly right. He's exactly right. What are you supposed to get and what you get? That's what an audit is. That's exactly what an audit is. What does the law say that these federal programs are supposed to deliver? And then are they delivering? That's the whole notion of an audit. You know, now what would be a review? A review would be what they're supposed to get. You know, that we have this program, we have this EC program, and we have 2 self-contains, we have 2 inclusion model, you know, and we have this. All right, that would be a review. An audit would be, this is what we got, and this is what they're supposed to get, and this is what's happening. This is what they're actually getting. It's that gap between the intended and the delivered. That's what we're trying to figure out. Why are we trying to figure that out? Are we trying to embarrass somebody? Angie, are we trying to embarrass somebody? Is that the whole point here?
No, we're trying to do what is best for kids.
We're trying to
making
be
sure that
champion for
everybody's
kids.
doing their job.
Yeah, we're trying to make sure our programs are delivered with fidelity. And sometimes what we find is what is stopping us from delivering with fidelity is our master schedule. So when we start master scheduling the school, we're going to have a rationale, or what we, you know, in terms of a priority order. What is number one when we start scheduling a school? Our federal programs. Those are the most restrictive. Those are the ones have the most the most policies. Those are our tightest in terms of what we have to deliver. So we have to schedule our federal programs first. Federal programs have to come first. And sometimes it's the schedule. You know, one of the things that I did was when I was a junior high principal, I had some self-contained, back in the day, we called them BEH, behavioral and emotionally handicapped kids. And I had some of those, and boy, they were just tearing the building up all the time. And we just weren't doing a very good job with them at all. I did 2 things. I rearranged their daily schedule, and I actually moved their physical environment from a very busy part of our building to a place that wasn't. It was actually a nicer place that we moved them to in terms of the actual physical environment. We moved them to a nicer place, but we got them we changed their daily schedule to where we didn't try to have them doing academic tasks after lunch. We did some things like that where they had we had their specials, as you call them now, what we used to call electives. I mean, everybody calls them specials now. We had those in the afternoon. And we tended to do a whole lot better. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. We changed their daily schedule, but now that obviously affected the whole school, because could the 7th graders have afternoon specials? No, they couldn't. And what did the 7th grade teachers want? I mean, 7th graders are the most hated kids in the world, whether it's, you know, especially in junior high. And the teachers didn't want to see them after lunch. But now, how happy were they that they had to have those 7th graders after lunch? They were not happy about that. But I had to do something to get those 2 BEH classes from tearing the building down every day. I got tired of knocking the knees out of my suit every day, wrestling them kids, fighting up in, you know, on the 900 hallway in front of the cafeteria. How smart was it to put these kids that really had issues right in front of the cafeteria where the kids congregated all the time, going in and out of the cafeteria all day? They backed up in the hallway there, and there was always a racket and a ruckus. I mean, it was just like, you know, it was like, you know, gladiator school every day. You know, I got tired of taking them down and wrestling and fighting and punch, knocking, you know, have a nice suit and tear the elbows out of it or knock the knees out of your pants every day, fighting that bunch. And so I used the master schedule to whip some of my problem there. Even I could figure that out. Now, it took me a while. I'm not telling you I figured it out the first day. But I eventually said, you know, we got to quit doing this. You know, I wasn't getting any younger. You know, when you get on up to when you get toward 40, you start trying to get smarter. You know, and so I'd been wrestling kids as an administrator for about 10 years at that time, and I finally figured out I want to quit wrestling kids. And so the idea was to make a schedule that worked better. So your federal programs, you need to audit your federal program. That comes first. And that's going to be the first thing that when we do your master schedule in task 3, we're going to first thing we're going to do is we're going to schedule our federal programs. Federal law comes first, then state law. And I've got planning, the laws on planning and how many hours and all that. And then your local board policy, whether you're doing AB day or block or whatever, whatever your schedule is. And then your performance data, who ought to be teaching what, that's EVOS. And then teacher input comes last. And that's also in that, let me share my screen, that it's in that master scheduling. There it is right there. That's the way it goes. Federal law and your federal programs, you schedule those first, but you got to know what's going on in them. And then your state law from the General Assembly, the state board, and NCDPI, then your local policy, then your best practices, EVOS performance data, and then teacher input. But we got to audit those programs if we're going to be able to know what we should and shouldn't do, what changes we need in those programs as they come first. All right, so now, when you finish all that, make sure that you hit that school's budgeting process. Not just what is the budget. We did that as a class activity, but what is the process? Now, one of the things you learn organizationally is the process determines the product. Let me say that again. The process determines the product. So when we do an audit or a review of our scheduling process, we're not talking about what the schedule looks like, but what is the process that leads us to that schedule? What is the process that leads us to that budget? If we've got a bad schedule, the worst thing you can do is try to change it, because the half of the people that were happy will now be mad. And the first group that was originally mad at you, they'll stay mad, even though you've made, you tried to make them happy. So now everybody will be mad. Worst thing you can do is try to fix a bad schedule. You need to fix the process that led to the bad schedule. Did you start with your federal programs? Did you then factor in your state law? Then did you get the non-negotiable policies from your district? Did you then look at the EVOS data? And did you then talk to teachers? And in that order. Same way with the budget. Was your school improvement team involved in the budget? So to make sure that it lined up with your school improvement plan. Spent all this time, legal requirement to develop this school improvement plan every year, and it just sits on the shelf because you didn't align your master schedule or your budget with it. So we want to look at those processes, your budgeting process, to make sure that it aligns with your school improvement plan. So that should be OMA Task 1. I should start seeing those hopefully by this weekend. All right. Other questions you have on OMA Task 1? I don't know why I'm feeling so generous today. I have added a new document for you under OMA Task and Prompts. OMA Task 2 Guide. I have made you a guide for Task 2. All right, so here are the bullets under Task 2. Formal program proposal approved by the strategic 4 times reviewed. Copy and paste APTEL Task 1. That's all you have to do. Now take the labels from the APTEL or the task or the directions, from the AppTel, but the copy and paste your AppTel task 1. Do the same thing in 2 for the second one, 3, and then a detailed plan. That is your graphic organizer of your professional growth plan at the end of task 3 of your AppTel. Please do not put that in your appendices. It goes in the body of OMA task 2. And then that audit that you did for OMA task 1, you simply copy and paste it there. And that's how you do OMA task 2. Should take you less than an hour. But please make sure that you get it right. Do not put this graphic organizer in your appendices. If you do, the evaluator will send it back. The whole point of OMA task 2 was this graphic organizer. So that's the things that you're to do. Anybody have any questions on how to copy and paste previously completed material that should take you less than an hour? Just take the labels from OMA, from AppTel off of it and slip them right under these. These are your headings under OMA task 2. These are your headings right here. Let me bold that for you. That would be your heading, and then you just copy and paste that underneath. Anybody have any questions on how to do OMA task 2?
Dr. Lynn,
Yes.
I think I can do that. If for some reason it is way off the mark when it's all done, will you just tell me? So,
Oh, I'm shy and retiring. I would never say anything about it.
okay, I figured that, but I just want to make sure.
I'll make sure I get you in front of everybody to
That
comment on
sounds
your
good.
work as too. I'm gonna prepare you to be an administrator. Now, if it looks like you should have used a crayon,
Yeah, right.
I will tell you that's the whole motion. Now, you go in and you upload your tasks for me to give you a review of. That's the first
Yep.
thing. And then I will tell you if they're good or bad. And if they're good, I'll say, excellent. Continue with peer review and move on to task 2. And what that means is if you get a review, you can integrate that in. If not, you're to move on. Now, if it's not good, I'll tell you exactly what needs to be done to fix it. I won't just say, read the rubric again. Well, you read it the first time and your lips and finger are already tired. So I won't tell you to do that again. And so I will tell you exactly what you need to do to fix it. Exactly. And we'll move on. We don't have time this summer, nor do I have the inclination to bounce this stuff back and forth. I will tell you if it's good, I'll tell you if it's not good, and I'll tell you what needs to be done to fix it. And so that part, so looking at our shell, right here in our shell, I have for you OMA task for review. You go in and upload them right here under OMA task 1. And as you know, that's where you will go and find your colleagues' work so you can peer review it, but you will put it there and I will review it for you and I will tell you to move on. And once it's been peer reviewed, you will simply drop it in your OMA assignment Dropbox. As soon as it's been peer reviewed, you just drop it here and you'll get a grade from me from the review, and then you'll get that same grade will be given when you put it here. It's just that simple. There is no middleman here or middlewoman. I do my own. I do this every semester. I grade my own work. I do my own evidence work. I appreciate the coaches. I'm glad to have them. I don't want to get rid of them. They do a great job, but I want to see your work. I'm the one who will sign your petition for license. I'm the one who will recommend you for a job as well. I can't see everybody. I try to see as many of you as I can, but the ones I do come in contact with, I want to be able to give an honest appraisal of your effort for both your license, a job, for grad school. I want to be able to do an honest appraisal of you, so I do my own. There was no need to have 2 coaches hanging around this summer, or a coach hanging around with nothing to do because I wasn't going to let them. So I loan them to somebody else. I don't need them. I will turn your work around same day. I don't care what time you turn it in, it will come back the same day. I'm old. I'm up early and stay up late. I will turn your work around every day. I grade morning and evening. That's a great question. All right. Other questions you have on the OMA? Those things should start rolling in here pretty soon. We need to be moving. All right, now. So next week, y'all are going to present your first case study, right? Everybody go, yes, Dale, we're going to present our first case study next week. All right, Paris, tell me what your group's been doing. Got that Clemson orange on today, just trying to make me mad.
It's not representing Clemson, but
Tennessee's
what I
playing
would-
baseball.
No, not a Tennessee baseball fan either. To be honest, our group has not met yet. We were trying to get through the end of school, and we're planning on meeting later this week to get started and get working together.
All right. All right. Now, don't get me stirred up here. I want these to be great. Remember, you got to do a PowerPoint. You got to address the question. So let me share my screen. And let's look at case study 1. All right. What should the principal's course of action be? Be sure to address the issues of due process, both substantive and procedural, and the standards of arbitrary and capricious. All right. Now, due process is going to, and you need to read what chapter 6 and 8. Didn't I tell you that? Right here, right there, it says so. You're going to have to address, did Bobby get due process? No, Bobby didn't get due process. I mean, Bobby got the most punishment that you can give. What's the most punishment you can give a kid? Anybody know?
Expulsion.
A 1-year exclusion. Can you actually expel a kid for life from school anymore? That would be no. After 1 year, what can they apply to do, Heather?
Go back to school.
They can apply to come back after 1 year. I don't care what they did. So the most you can do to a kid is exclude them for a year. And that's only after a 10-day suspension, a due process hearing, a hearing from the board, probably going to go to court. All those things have to happen. Did Bobby get any of that? No, Bobby got none of that. Teacher said, I'm going to make this homework assignment that should have counted 1/10 of 1 point on the final grade. I'm going to make that homework assignment count more than half of the yearly grade. You failed for the year, Bobby. Is that not an exclusion for a year? Well, of course it is. Is that not a zero tolerance expulsion, which is expressly forbidden by the Office of Civil Rights? Is that not a violation of federal law? Why, of course it is. You need to address zero tolerance expulsion. So not only have you broken state law, you've broken federal law too, and local board policy. This is the trifecta. What's local board policy? Local board policy sets, and that's in your handbook, it sets the grading scale for your classes. Could you, as a school district, set up your grading scale where homework would count more than half of the yearly grade? Could you do that? No. Who says you can't do that? Well, State Board of Education and the General Assembly says you can't do that. How much does the state test? End of grade test or end of course test? Everybody knows end of grade's elementary and end of course is high school, right?
Yeah.
How much can it count? It can count between 20 and 30, no more than 30. And your local board has adopted the policy, it can only count 20. That is correct. Gaston County, even the state exam can only count 20% of the final grade. The most it can count by state law is 30. Nobody much uses that, but that's the most it can count. Least it can count is 20. What's the most homework can count according to the state? 10%. And that's homework for every day, 200 days. So how much can one homework assignment be? Half of 1%, right? Y'all can do that math quickly, can't you? So any one homework assignment can only count half of 1% of the final grade. That's the most it could count. Half of 1%. That's if it's a weekly assignment. More than likely, if it's a daily assignment, it only count 1/10 of 1%. Great day. So this was a 1/10 of 1% at most, 1/100th of 1% at least, and we counted it more than half of the yearly grade. So it doesn't. So the substance of the due process is this is what you're supposed to do. The actual procedure was she just said, nah, this counts more than half. Now, full disclosure, Bobby's probably a turd. I know that's probably not a clinical term, but it's probably pretty accurate. And so, you know, I get it. Bobby's a turd and probably been a pain in her behind all year long. But again, you got to be championing for kids. Kids that need love the most deserve it the least. Everybody knows that. And so, but you can't just say, well, you know, what's the most punishment in Gaston County schools according to your code of conduct for cheating? Plagiarism. This wasn't actually cheating, this was plagiarism. Turn in somebody else's work. What's the most punishment your code of conduct says you can give for that?
0 for that assignment, I believe.
So when it says, like in this case study, that you may fail, it doesn't mean you may fail for the year. It means you may fail that assignment. Most places give you reduced and do some go one way or the other. They either give you a 0 and that's it, or they give you some credit for the assignment if you on a makeup, and they do some like a day of in-school suspension. I don't know anybody that gives out of school suspension for this. This kid got a year exclusion over turned in somebody else's homework assignment. Does that not sound a little bit capricious to you? What does capricious mean? What's the standards of arbitrary and capricious? Arbitrary is real simple. Me and Daphne are out behind the gym smoking, and Wanda catches us, and she tells Daphne to go on back to class, and she just shoots me. Bang. Isn't that a little bit much? First, it was arbitrary. She picked, you know, she punished me and not Daphne, but capricious, that's a little bit much to shoot me over smoking. Now, I know smoking's bad for you, and I'm not a smoker, but that seems a little excessive to shoot me over smoking. Just say it. Well, that's basically what has happened in this case. You know, this teacher has shot Bobby over smoking. Did everybody that cheated all year long get shot like Bobby did? Of course not. So we got a number of things working here. Now 115C 288A says who grades and classifies students, Megan?
The teacher?
No.
That's the principal.
Principal. 115C 288A is duties and responsibilities of the principal. And it says the principal grades and classifies students, period. Doesn't say anything in there about the teacher. Teacher just recommends the grades. Principal assigns final grades always. That is correct. Let's go back and double check that.
I literally just read that, so I can't play like I did know that before.
Yeah. And so if we go back and we look at this right that I've said, you know, that goes right with this, it is literally the first. That's why it's the first case. To grade and classify pupils, the principal shall have the authority to grade and classify pupils. Period. And determine appropriate grade for pupils who's already attended both special school pupils classroom work and grades. Pupils standardized tests, best education into the pupil. That's what I'm talking about. And we have to, and then the district sets up what the percentages are, and the principal enforces it. Again, the substance of the grading policy is the school board adopts the grading policy for the district in terms of how much everything counts. Now, the state says, here are your parameters. You can't make homework count 60%, you know, and state tests count 1%. No, they give them a guide as to how much everything counts or how much you can do and what can cost. But then it's up to you as the principal to make sure that that procedure is carried out. Again, the state and the local come up with the due process substance. The state says state tests can count between 20 and 30. Classwork counts between 20 and 30. Homework can count between 0 and 10. And local assessments between 10 and 20. Like those quarterly tests, they set that, but then your local board, on the recommendation probably of the superintendent or the curriculum department, says we think it ought to be 30, 20, 10, what those numbers can actually be, because there's always a range. So Gaston County has decided that they'll make state tests count 20, but now I'm betting that they've upped how much the local assessments count to make up for that.
I think with the last time I did benchmarks or DFAs, they called them. I don't know if they went back. We couldn't assign a grade to that. Somebody correct me. I mean, I'm high school, social studies. It's been 2 or 3 years now since we've had those, but I was not allowed to put the grade in the grade book for those.
I know for our Math 1, Biology, Math 3, and English 10, they still do like check-ins or benchmarks, and the teachers are allowed to put them in the grade book how they want because it's not the final. So I have some teachers that put it in as a test, and some teachers make it a quiz. I don't particularly like it, but because it's not the final, they're allowed to do what they want with it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of flexibility in there, and that's what the state board and the General Assembly and DPI want, is some local flexibility on those kinds of things. Now, the problem becomes if it's arbitrary, one teacher does it one way and one teacher does it the other. See, if I was principal, I'd say, all right, if we have this flexibility, that's fine, but we're all going to do it one way or we're all going to do it the other. That's that procedural due process that you're in charge of as a principal. I would not just say, do it the way you want to, and I'll figure it out later, because I would like to stay employed and stay in my home. I don't want to lose my house over this. But that's Heather just pointed out. Therein lies your problem on the procedural part of due process. When you have some leeway here and you say, well, do whatever you want to do. We'll do it one kid, but would you not be able to argue in court that that's arbitrary? That counting it as a test for one kid could be capricious. He could get punished more than counted as a quiz for another kid. And see, that's the problem that you have there. And see, these are the kinds of things that you've got to establish procedure. If you have some leeway in your building, all right, that's fine. We got to decide one way or the other. It's got to count the same for everybody. I'm not going to go to court and defend that this teacher counted as a test and this one counted as a quiz. The kids made the same score and this kid failed and this one passed because of it, because it was counted more for the one over here as a test than a quiz. That's what we're talking about here. That's what you're supposed to learn from this, is you're the one who is charged with the procedure of due process. Somebody else figures the substance out. That's above your pay grade. You're charged with following through on it. And I would not allow that. In no way would I do that. I would make sure that we count it the same for everybody. Every teacher counted it the same way. One of the problems you get into, especially in high school, and y'all know this, is that the people who are more lenient on the grading, the kids, that's who they want. And they have their mamas come and pitch a fit until they get in there. They do everything in the world to get in that teacher's room. Well, we can't have everybody in Charlene's room. We can't have everybody in there. And then, we look across the hall and there's nobody over there with me. We can't have that. That's not the way it works. We go back to the, we go back to the It's, I'm having a senior moment here. I'm trying to remember my acronyms. Our school report that we pull out of Power School every year, and we pull it out every month. We pull out the principal's monthly report for attendance. We pull out the SAR, the school activity report, for the master schedule. Your master schedule has to be fed into Power School, and we generate a school activity report. And one of the first things that we look at, or the first thing we look at on the school activity report, is class size. Because the state, when they give you that teacher, they say this high school teacher can't have more than 32 kids in their room. That's 29 with a 10% overage. That'd be 32. What happens if we start letting parents and kids start teacher shopping because of grading policy? What happens then? Everybody wants in Heather's room rather than mine, because I'm a grumbly old man and I grade harder than she does, and teach worse. I'm not as good a teacher and I'm a harder grader. Then nobody wants to be in my room. Well, we can't have 60 in her room and 4 in mine. Well, we average 32. That's not the way it works. That's not the way the school activity report works. And so, I'll just tell you right now, to solve a lot of headaches, especially in high school, you better make sure that your grading system is carried out, standardized the same for everybody. The procedure of grading is done the same. But back to our case study, principal assigns the grades. So what are you going to do now, hero? You've got this woman who has failed a kid over a homework assignment that should have counted between 100th of 1 point and 1/10 of 1 point on his final grade, and she's failed him for the year. She's excluded him for an entire year.
You give him what do? Do you give him a 0 according to your county policy for a homework grade that counts for 10% or whatever it is?
What you do is you follow through on whatever the policy is. If it says that he can do a makeup for 70%, you tell him to do a makeup and you give him a day of in school if that's the most you can give him. That's what you do. You follow whatever the policy is in your district. That's what you do. But one homework assignment, you can't count it 10% because it's just one. That's why I said it can only count between, if you had one every day, it would be 100. If you had one every week, it'd be a 10. How often do you give homework? You have to calculate that. It can't count more than that. It's according to how often this teacher assigns homework. If it's every day, then that's only worth 1/10 of a point. So that we have to recalculate his final grade. We can't fail a kid over turning in his brother's homework. That's the same as shooting me out back. That's just a little much. And so that's the notion of this case study here is there's a lot of political pieces and who Bobby's family is and the fact that Bobby's a turd and all that business. Now, I've had students argue, well, it's not really an exclusion or a zero tolerance violation of federal law if we let him go to summer school. Federal law is very clear. You have violated his civil rights. Even if you offer him an alternative placement, it doesn't matter. You still excluded him for the year. And that you offered him an alternative placement for 8 weeks or whatever, 10 weeks in the summer does not change that. So let's be clear about how zero tolerance suspensions or expulsions work. That you offered an alternative does not change the fact that you violated federal law, the Office of Civil Rights. It does not change that. So this one is a really easy one. You're the one that signs the final grade. You go back and calculate his grade. You take a 1/10 of a point off of his grade, you know, but if you give him an alternative assignment and then he turns it in and he can make a 70 or a 50, you know, you instead of taking a 10th off, you take a 20th off or a 14th off, a point of his final grade, and then that's the grade he gets for the year. But the bigger issue becomes, what are you going to do with that teacher now? What are you going to do with that teacher? I mean, she did this thing. She knowingly did. Now, don't be one of those. Don't be somebody who rides. No, better not say that. Can't say that anymore. But don't be a dumb person who argues the teacher didn't know any better and it's the administrator's fault because they didn't cover the grading policy with them. What are principals required to do with the first required workday every year? Go over the faculty handbook, right? What is legally required to be in the faculty handbook?
Grading policy,
right? So don't claim the teacher didn't know any better. And it said that a student may fail. It said that means they may fail the assignment. They may just get a 0 or they may get a reduced grade. Nowhere in the law can it say they may fail for the year over cheating. You're supposed to know that, because that would be a violation of civil rights to fail a kid for the year over one grade that can't count as more than a 10th of a point. You're not allowed to do that. I've had students say, well, it should say that he may fail the assignment. You're supposed to be a school administrator. You're supposed to know that. We don't have to tell you everything, do we? You're supposed to know the law, that all you can address with that is that one assignment. You can't fail a kid for a year over one assignment. You're supposed to know that piece. But now the question becomes, this teacher intentionally did this. Unless you're telling me that you violated the law and didn't put the grading policy in the handbook and didn't cover it at the opening faculty meeting. Now, if you did that, now Laura would never do that. That might be something I'd do. But now you're telling me that this teacher didn't know that she was doing this.
I think part of what you do with the teacher has to do with how you handle her professional development plan for the remainder of the year until you find that this behavior is no longer being repeated.
So we're having next week's conversation tonight, but that's okay. So you're gonna do an action plan on her?
That's what I was going to say, action plan. Begin an action plan.
Well, y'all are hard. Y'all gonna do an action plan on her. Y'all are tough. No, I think that's probably, I think that's the right answer, is an action plan. I think that's absolutely the right answer. Now, my answer is, I would try my very, very, very best to fire her that day. Now, that's just me. I'm old school. You know, a man's game demands a man's price. You tried to ruin this kid's life. I mean, I can't think of any, short of physically or sexually assaulting a kid, what could you have done that was worse than this? I had a student one time say, well, if she did something really bad again, or if she did something really bad, I could see fire. What could be worse than this other than physically or sexually abusing Bobby? What could be worse than trying to exclude him for a whole year and ruin his life? What could be worse? This is the most punishment that you can give a kid, period. This is the worst punishment you can give. Now, I'm not saying it's as bad as if you beat him or sexually assaulted him, but legally, the most punishment we can give to any kid, and we've got to jump through hoops, and the board's got to vote and got to go to court and through every advocacy agency in town to exclude a kid for a year. She's done that to him, and all he did was turn in his brother's homework assignment. She's got to go. I got to figure out a way to get her out of the building if it's me. But you're right. Probably the most appropriate thing, and the thing that the district would probably go along with, would be an action plan. But I would be on the superintendent's doorstep. You remember when you said be careful with this one, and you wanted to have some input. Well, now I'm calling on you now. This teacher's got to go, and I don't mean she's got to go from Highland over to somewhere else in the district. I mean, she's got to go home. My wife's a kind person. When I used to have to do bad things like this, and my wife, when I was in the central office, and my wife said, "But where'd they go?" I said, "Honey, I don't know. They didn't have to go home, but they couldn't stay here. We couldn't abide them any longer. We can't allow this kind of thing. We have to draw the line somewhere as a school district in what we will do, what we'll allow and what we won't allow. That there's a bridge too far, there's a point too far. That you tried to give the kid the most punishment that we can meter out in a school district, overturning his brother's homework assignment, tells me that I can't have you in the building with me and other folks. Now, sometimes folks will say, well, won't that make other teachers, won't that make them mad at you or distrust you? And one of the things that I read recently, and I've always believed is that other teachers will get mad if you don't. If you allow abusive people and sorry teachers to be in your building. I think the best of folks in their professionalism. I think other teachers would understand that this was beyond the pale. This doesn't have to be a pattern. I mean, how many people do you have to shoot before you say we got to stop him from shooting people? I mean, one's more than enough. You've tried to ruin Bobby's life here. And so this is much of the discussion that we're going to have next week, but these are things that you should be thinking about. I mean, this person has done a really bad thing. The law, you need to track all the laws, due process, both substantive and procedure. Substance is above your level. Procedures that you carried out appropriately. What did this teacher do? I mean, was the grading appropriate? Of course it wasn't. Did the punishment fit the crime? Of course it didn't. It was capricious. It was too much. One of my favorite stories on arbitrary and capricious is I was doing a due process hearing at Providence High School when I was in the central office for a kid that brought 2 huge knives to school and threatened people. And he showed up, he was 18 years old, and he showed up with his attorney. His parents were out of town. So he showed up with his attorney, and you tell these people before they start, anything you say can and will be used against you. He brought his attorney. The district had their associate general counsel, and obviously I represent myself because I'm the person who's there as the impartial person in the judiciary to hear the case. And so but I have to advise them of all their rights and do all those things. And he let him testify. And he let him testify. Yeah, he brought the knives. He had them both. And I was like, this is not going to be good. This kid's 18. This transcript's going to go straight to his court case. He's going to end up with jail time out of this. How in the world is it? Now, full disclosure, his attorney looked like he was, if you remember the movie Revenge of the Nerds, he looked like Booger. He looked like he was about 18 years old, just out of law school, was doing some pro bono work or something. I don't know where in the world they got this guy. But I was like, I'm trying to get him the high sign over here. You might want to have him not under oath, admit that he brought this knife and he just had him, and I'm like, what in the world is going on here? And then we got to closing comments. The argument that his attorney made is that the punishment of 10 days with a movement for an exclusion they weren't actually asking for an exclusion. They were asking for a placement in an alternative school for 6 weeks. And that was capricious based on the code of conduct. That according to the code of conduct, the maximum that he could be given was to be a 5-day suspension. And that's when I had to point out to Booger that he had the elementary code of conduct, that the senior high code of conduct was 10 days and an exclusion hearing. And then he wanted to strike all of his comments and his clients from the record. We don't do that. We record those. It is a court proceeding. The kid was lucky to stay out of it. His parents spent a fortune trying to keep him out of jail. But he tried to argue on the basis of capricious, that, that the punishment has to fit the crime. And that's why we have a code of conduct. When we get to our disciplinary module in a couple of weeks, we'll talk about that. But again, the standard is arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary is, did you punish me and pass or just me? Or capricious, you shot me for smoking and let Daphne go back to class. That's way too much. And so this is a case of arbitrary and capricious. It's a case of violating federal law on OCR law on a zero tolerance expulsion. It's a case of who has the authority to give the grade, the teacher or the principal. All of those things are wrapped up together. And it's also, what are you going to do with it's a personnel issue as well. And you learned about action plans last semester. What are you going to do with this person? Back to that professional growth plan, back to those action plans. That's probably the appropriate thing. Now, again, full disclosure, I'd try to fire if I could. But you're probably right. Probably the most that your superintendent's going to go for, or your county attorney, general counsel is going to go for, is probably an action plan. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't try.
What would you make sure to have in hand if you were going to fire or try to fire?
This would be professional misconduct. I mean, she broke the law. That's pretty easy. I mean, she tried to fail a kid, do a zero tolerance expulsion, and did not give the kid due process. She manipulated. She broke state law by manipulating the grading and local board policy by manipulating the grading schedule for the grading policy for the district. She violated federal and state law and local board policy. And that's professional misconduct. You can't do that. So that would be my argument, that under the standard of professional misconduct. Yeah. But again, your general counsel may not go for that, and your superintendent may not go for that. But I would certainly make them make that decision. I would certainly make them make that decision. Again, you got to be champion for children. You can't allow things like this to happen in your building. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't happen a lot and that it hadn't happened and it used to be a whole lot worse. They used to beat us like, rented mules when I was in school. I mean, just awful. And even when I taught school, we still paddled. I mean, I remember Bud Grissom hitting James Ruff so hard he knocked him through. He knocked him through a desk, not over. He knocked him through it. He hit him so hard. And one of the fellows that was my mentor was a lot older. He said, what do you think would happen if that went to court? I was a high school teacher. He said, what do you think would happen if that went to court? And they saw poor little James there. He's probably 5'4", 100 pounds soaking wet. And Bud hit him. He was probably 6'2", probably weighed better part of 300 pounds. Was an first team All-American offensive lineman at Chapel Hill. Had the strength of 10 men. Seriously. He hit him so hard with that, he had a paddle the size of a boat oar. He hit him so hard he knocked him through a desk. I would have not believed it if I hadn't been there to see it. He hit him so hard. That was even when I taught school. And one of the best things that ever happened in school was stopping corporal punishment. Because kids, when I was in school, they beat us unmercifully. Just beat us. They wasn't paddling, they just beat us. Out in the country schools, man, they just tear you up on a regular basis. Drop of a hat. That was the answer to everything. And we've got to. There's still some remnants of that around, but now it's like, because we can't physically abuse kids, we do other things to try to abuse them. We have some people who don't need to be in the business. And I'll bet if you've been in it for more than a day or two, you probably know some people that don't need to be in the business. And when they step over the line like this, then you have to do what you have to do. You can't allow them to prey on children. You've got to be a champion for kids. All right. So we've talked about our activity this week. We've talked about our case study. We've talked about the OMA. What gaps do I need to fill in for you on any of those three areas before we talk about this week's assignment and exceptional children's programs? All right. So let's share my screen. And so this module is all about exceptional children. Now, here's the goods, folks. Again, I don't know why I'm so good to y'all. Dr. Caton and Dr. Maraglia's folder has all the best stuff for IEPs. Here's a reference sheet for the IEP process. OCR, Office of Civil Rights Complaints. That's what we've been talking about tonight. MTSS team structures. DTM, this is when you want to discipline an exceptional child. Here's EC discipline procedures. I think I've even got that one pulled up. Copy of tiers. This is for high school. Annual IEP meeting review. And so there are the things that I have for you in that. So first thing I want to talk about, let me see, Mel. Okay. Before we get to exceptional children, I want to talk about intervention teams. What is an intervention team? Every school is required to have one. What is an intervention team? Somebody, anybody, what's an intervention team?
For most of us, it would be our MTSS team that helps us to develop strategies and interventions for children who are struggling academically or even with behavior or
That is correct. State law says every public school, this is state law, every public school must have an intervention team. It is referred to colloquially as an SBC, a school-based committee. Why is that important? All these acronyms, Dale. Why is it important to know that it's a school-based committee? That means if it goes bad, whose job and whose house is on the line if it goes bad? That would be you as school principals. There's no compliance technician, there's no EC chair, there's none of that as a buffer or EC department. Now, you know that in your EC department, you have folks at the central office, you have these compliance technicians that work with your school, and you have EC chairs. You have all of that buffer because the EC is and 504 is federal. Your intervention team is a state mandate, and it's referred to as a school-based committee, more specifically, so that nobody at the central office is responsible for it. It means a school-based committee means the principal is responsible to make sure that all the things that are supposed to happen with that committee happen. And it's teachers refer kids who have academic and or behavioral issues. Now you say, well, I'm in high school. We don't have it. Every school has one. Now, most of these things have been identified in the elementary and in a few more maybe in middle, but high school has to have one too. And that's why I showed you that one, the one that intervention team. Let me go back to that. Let me share my screen. Copy of MTSS tiers for Aiden Grifton High School. That's why that one. And it says what they'll get every tier, even in the high school. Everyone. So the notion here is it was supposed to be done by July of 2020. Every North Carolina school district was supposed to have fully implemented MTSS. Who knows what MTSS stands for?
Multi-tiered systems of support.
That is correct. And so what it was designed to be was the 90 before the 90. What does that mean? What does 90 before the 90 mean? When a kid is referred for EC, Exceptional Children's Services, before they test him, they have to do 90 days. What does that 90 days consist of? It consists of 30 days of anecdotals and 30 days of the first intervention and 30 days of either a continuation of the first intervention or a second intervention if the first one didn't work. So, and after that 90 days, a decision is made as to whether or not to test that child for exceptional children's services. That's federal law. Now, what North Carolina requires is when that referral comes in, it goes to the intervention team first. Now, that kid gets the same rights and protections as if he were an EC kid already. Got to remember that. But now there's 90 before the 90. So what does 90 before the 90? I just told you what the 90 federal is. 30 days of anecdotals, 30 days of the first intervention, 30 days of the second or continuation of the first, for a total of 90 days. MTSS is up to a total of 90 days before that, 3 tiers, 30, 30, and 30. Now, everybody was supposed to get there by July of 2020, but COVID hit. Some districts are behind. So you have to know, where is your district on the 30, 30, 30? Have you gotten to 90 yet? Are you doing all 3 tiers? That's part of what you're supposed to find out this week. Where are you and where is your school? Are you doing the full 90 before the 90? So that means that by the time that we get through with all of it, we've done 180 days of anecdotals and interventions before we even make a EC testing decision. And we reteach those lessons. And so I hired a young man as a junior high teacher in Charlotte a long time ago, and he's an elementary principal now. He's been elementary principal at 3 schools in Charlotte. He got his first principalship, and he's opened 2 new schools up in the northern part of the county where I live, in my home area. He opened Washing Pots. He was AP at Cornelius, and he opened Washing Pots. And then he opened the new Grand Oaks Elementary. His name's Ray Giovanelli. Ray's a great fellow. I still remember him as being a 20 something, but he's in his 50s now. That's how old I am. But anyway, so Ray G, when he was at Cornelius, called me and said, we've got, he was at Washing Pots, he was at Washing Pots, and said, we've been doing reading 3D for 3 years, and we're not, as we've been doing, RTI, reading 3D, whatever. We've been doing that as part of our intervention program, MTSS, for 3 years, and our reading scores have been exactly the same for 3 years. Can you come and let's look and see what the problem might be? And I said, sure. So I went there, and they were doing response to intervention as their first level of MTSS. Everybody knows what RTI, response to intervention, is. It's a basically you assess kids and you do customized lessons for you regroup, do flexible group of kids who are missing the same kinds of things. But it's a different kind of lesson. It's not what you did in the first time where you just did the same lesson the second time, except raise your voice and wave your hands more. It's a completely different, instructional modality on the second go around in RTI. And so I went and, I looked around and I went down and talked to his RTI coordinator, who would now be called the MTSS coordinator. And I asked her how she was sure that teachers actually delivered those prescripted lessons differently than they did the first time. And, so the kids who don't get the prescripted lesson may go to PE or may go to something else, but they regroup. And I said, how do you know that those prescripted lessons are being delivered with fidelity? And she said, well, I have them fill out this log. And I said, well, how often do you go down to the room and see those lessons? And she said, never. I don't have time to do that. I've got paperwork to do. So what's the probability that those prescripted lessons were getting delivered if the kids' test scores were 80, 80, 80 for 3 years in a row? Was there an actual intervention happening? No, there wasn't. Again, that's procedural. The substance was that these kids get this. That's due process. They get this level intervention, response to intervention, these prescripted lessons. But the person who was supposed to be checking on that wasn't checking on that. There's your problem. Took me about 15 minutes to figure that out. No smarter than I am. It took about 15 minutes. But what did I know walking in, knowing their scores were 83 years? I knew there wasn't an intervention happening. That's simple probability. And so that's what we're talking about here. What is the substance of your MTSS program? What do we say that kids are supposed to get in Gaston County in elementary, middle, or high school? What are they supposed to get? And then are they getting it? That's the procedural part of it. That's why I said you got to audit all your federal programs, and I want you to add your intervention teams as well, because you're going out to do that this semester. I mean, you're doing that, for your activity, but you should include that in your OMA as well, because it now dovetails into that federal 90. The state 90 MTSS dovetails into the federal 90. And there's something that your district says these kids get in all three tiers, that 30, 30, 30, prior to that 30, 30, 30 on the federal end as well. So the whole point is what are we trying not to do?
Classify students as EC.
That's correct. We're trying not to do that. In 2014, a few years after I retired, 2014, you could Google it. You could go to the Google. In August, right before school opened, 11, 3 or 4 years after I retired. In 2014, in August of 2014, 11 elementary principals were either demoted or fired or retired. Right before, the week before school started. Why do you think that was? What could happen that 11 elementary principals bit the dust that week, all in one little group? Well, usually that means they broke the law. What law did that group break? Well, it was real simple. When teachers were bringing a certain class category of kid and referring them for this process, they were being tested the next day. There was no federal 30, 30, 30 process. And they certainly, of course, we didn't, we were just getting into RTI back then, response to intervention. There wasn't any kind of a state intervention or local intervention, or we didn't even do we just tested them. That class was Black African-American males. When they were being referred, they would just test them immediately and put them in EC. It was, it was faster than a speeding bullet. The kid get referred and 2 days later, they were in the EC class. Just that quick. Well, again, that's a violation of federal law. It's also now a violation of state law that you've got to put them through MTSS first. But there was 11 elementary schools that's how they were doing business in Charlotte. That's how that was their disciplinary plan. I mean, that's the only plan that I've ever heard that's worse than, if your number of incidents or number of out of school suspensions, and we'll talk about this in 2 weeks, exceeds the district or state average, you have to write a safety plan for your school. And this is the only thing that I've ever heard of worse than some of the principals that I supervised would turn in their plan was, we're going to go to school uniforms. Well, that's just stupid. They ought to make you wear a helmet and a sign if you're that dumb. That's just kids behaving badly dressed similarly. How is putting uniforms on a kid going to make them change their behavior? That's not a plan. But there was 11 elementary schools in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. Their disciplinary plan, because of their number of incidents, was we'll throw all these black males into exceptional children. We'll put them over there in the EC program, and we'll get them out of the mainstream. We won't have to deal with them. That'll make our schools safe. Except you violated their civil rights. And then we get into how many days can you suspend a kid that's exceptional children? How many days is that? That'd be 10.
Yeah.
Does in-school suspension count? Yes, it does. Does detention count? Yes, it does. If you take them out of their regular classroom, it counts against your 10. Now, then I had dumb principals who said, well, I don't care what they do, I'm only going to give them 1 day. That way I've got a lot of days to play with. Well, that's just stupid too. What they're trying to avoid is the manifestation, termination, functional behavior assessment, updated psychological and updated IEP. You have to go through all that before you can do something, to determine if that kid's behavior is a manifestation of their disability. And they don't want to have to go through all that paperwork. So I'm going to give them, I'll just give them 1 day at a time, or I'm not going to count those in-school suspension days. That way I've got more out-of-school suspension days I can give them. That's a violation of their civil rights. Anytime you move them from the room that they're in to another room, I don't care where it is, that's a change in placement, and it counts against the 10. And there's also the caveat that everybody doesn't understand either, is pattern. On the third time a kid does the same thing, that's a pattern. He goes straight to the front of the line. You start the DTM process on him. Third time. Well, and but I've only suspended him twice this year. I still got 8 more days. No, you don't. Don't be stupid. You don't have 8 more days. He's showing a pattern, or she is showing a pattern on that third time. Then I had a student ask me last night, well, what if it's been? I said, I don't care if the first day of suspension was August, the second was in September, and then the third incident occurs in April. Does that count? Yes, it still counts. That's a pattern. We go straight to manifestation determination, a functional behavior assessment, a behavior intervention plan, and an updated IEP. And we determine if this kid, if this is a manifestation of their disability. If you don't do those things, you have violated federal and state law. So the thing to remember here is we don't just test kids unless their parent comes and requests it. And then we still got a couple of steps we need to go through. But now when you get a referral to the intervention team, it's the same as they're federally protected. They have the same, you can't just start sending them home. They get 30, 30, 30 on the state MTSS intervention. And they get 30, 30, 30 on the federal before. That's 180 days before you ever make a testing decision whether to test them or not. And once a kid is tested and placed, anything that you do that changes the classroom that they're in is considered a change in placement, You've got up to 10 days on those before you have to go through the whole manifestation determination process. But the exception is on the third time they do the same thing, it negates the 10 days. You go straight to manifestation determination on the third time. Third time kid gets in the fight, off he goes. Well, I didn't get to suspend him his day. It doesn't matter. It's the way it works. That's the law. That's exceptional children's law. All right, so 94-142. How long's that been around? That says exceptional children can go to school. How long has it been around? I never went to school except, well, there was a few exceptional kids hanging around when I was in school, but they always helped the janitor. Their parents wanted them to come to school and learn to be a janitor. That was about it, but they didn't go to school with us. It's only been in since 1974. Now, during my era as a principal, the problem was is elementary, especially, parents come in and EC parents complaining that they weren't getting all the services they were entitled to. The latest and one of the case studies that you're going to have at the end, the last case study is about basic ed parents coming in and complaining about the inclusion model, where EC kids now go to regular classroom and the teacher goes in and works with them in the classroom. And we have a lot of parents. Now you're going to have in Gaston County, it's going to be no different. You're going to have parents who come in and they're going to start by, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to make a declarative statement. I am not a fill in the blank, racist, bigot, misogynist, whatever. And then they're going to commence to say the most racist, bigoted, misogynist thing you've ever heard about exceptional children, and claim that they're preventing their child from getting a basic education. So now it's basic ed regular ed parents who complain more than everybody knows the laws on EC now. Everybody's got websites. Let me share my screen. Everybody knows all this stuff now. You've got parent information resources, handbooks. You've got website for FERPA, Privacy Act, and how all the information has to be handled, all of these things. I mean, everybody, all this stuff is out there now. And I've got a link. I've fixed the FERPA link today, by the way, if you've been trying to get in that one, it wasn't working, but I fixed it today. The parent right handbook one, that one is working. And so if we go here, you've got all these parent resources, you've got FERPA, you've got all these things. So these parents know, and they advocate very well, and there's advocates for them. Now the kickback on exceptional children is over the inclusion model, where we're putting exceptional children, learning disabled exceptional children in regular classroom. Now, the case study that we have is a little extreme, as all of them are. And the problem there is they're making the gifted kids teach the EC kids. That's who they teach them every day. That's their vision of an inclusion model. Of course, that violates the rights of the gifted kids, and the parents have a right to complain. So we'll talk about that case later. But the whole notion here is you need to know what kids are supposed to get in your building. What is your intervention plan? What is your MTSS? Do you get all 90 in your building? And you're already supposed to know from the audit that you're doing right now, you're supposed to know what EC programs you have and what they're supposed to be getting in your building. And now you're not as on the hook for the EC to make sure it's being delivered with fidelity, but as my example, you can help yourself by scheduling those federal programs better and doing a better job for your kids and not beating yourself up. But you're on the hook for that MTSS program. So that should be factored into your schedule as well, because it is a school-based committee. But again, dealing with those parents, all those issues with exceptional children, what are they supposed to get? I've had everything from autistic to I had St. Mark's kids one year when I was in Charlotte. And those are the kids that are in beds. They're severely and profoundly handicapped, and they're actually in gurneys. They wheel them in and out. I've gone from, I mean, I've had them that bad. You know, we had kids so bad at Metro, we built a new Metro school, we had to build bathrooms in every classroom. I mean, those kids couldn't even, it was too hard to even get them down to the bathroom and back. I mean, we've had everything, you can have anything from that, but usually they're in a public separate. But generally, you need to know, hearing impaired, do you have, autistic? Now, one of my personal pet peeves is autism. Autism is a thing, it's real. But unfortunately, most parents who have children who have are mentally handicapped in some way or mentally disabled want their kid placed autistic because it's not nearly as deep a stigma, and that becomes a problem. Most autistic kids are pretty high functioning, and that it becomes a scream and a yell all the time. The parents are over there every day, trying to beat everybody up and punch everybody verbally and otherwise that'll listen to get their kid placed autistic when their child is not autistic, they're mentally disabled. That becomes a problem as well. And so that's why you've got to make sure you follow through all of the policies of your district. Make sure that when you talk to your EC chair, what are the steps for placement? What do we do? What do we consider? What do we factor in? Why is it we offer this rather than that? These are learning things that you need. Why are we offering, why do we have this group that's autistic, or why do we have this group that's mainstream, but this group's inclusion? Why do we have self-contained for these learning disabled kids, but these get to go to the regular class? I mean, what are those determinants? That will help you with your schedule. It'll help you figuring out your master schedule. So when we look at the inclusion model, again, what we call inclusion, let me go to that. I've got a good PowerPoint for you here. And it tells you what the differences are. But now, for the purposes of this, what we refer to as mainstreaming is they're in a separate classroom with the EC teacher. The kids go to the teacher. They're not self-contained all day. They may go to that teacher for one class like they would go to a history class. That's what we're talking about. So you got to understand the language here. Self-contained means you go to Marsha's room and you stay with her all day long. Mainstream means that you go to Paris's room for one period of the day and she teaches you English rather than the other English. Inclusion means you don't go to you go to regular classes all day, and the EC teacher comes to there with you. You've got to know what version of this your school and your district offers. Now, every school's not the same, even in the same district. You got to know what's being offered. So you understand what self-contained is. That's pretty simple. It's self-explanatory. We hold some truths to be self-evident there, Lincoln. Self-contained means they go there and stay there all day. Mainstream means that it's the EC teacher for one period or two periods, different EC. Inclusion means they never go to an EC teacher class. Everybody got that now? Make sure that you understand the terminology. And I've got it pretty well defined for you here, what goes on. Now, if you can be the smart person in the room who says, well, Dale, inclusion, it's not as good as mainstreaming. And I would say, okay, that wasn't the purpose of inclusion. When you have parents come in who are going to tell you that as well, the EC parents going to say, this inclusion is not nearly as good as the mainstreaming. And they went to the EC teacher for math or for reading. It's not as good. And what you're going to have to be able to say without being as blunt as I am is you're exactly right. Inclusion model was not developed to better deliver services. That's, you've got to understand that. Why was the inclusion model developed? To save money. Cost 30% less. And so therein lies your problem. And there's going to be a lot of complaints. The inclusion model garners a lot, Laura can tell you this, a lot of parent complaints on both sides. From both sides, both the parents who don't like those kids being in the room with their kids, and the EC parents who realize that my child's not getting near the attention and help that they were when they went to the EC teacher's room, and everybody's unhappy about it. You get roasted on both sides. So if you get in there and kind of figure it out and find ways to maybe facilitate and do a better job with it, maybe you can take a break and not get roasted one day every now and then by one of these groups of parents on one side or the other. But the parents are both right. This isn't as good a model. It is not as good for their kids as mainstreaming was. And then the regular ed parents are right in that there is an EC kid in your child's classroom now. You need to learn to go to school with people different than you, but I can't, that's just the way the world works. But we have so many parents now who think that public schools ought to offer them a private school experience or a charter school experience where they can choose to go. Most privates and charters are not about what you learn. They're about who's not there. That's the whole purpose. And a lot of public school parents want they want that same experience. Well, then you need to go to a charter or a private school. And so you're going to get a lot of complaints from parents on your exceptional children's program and even on your intervention team. How come, Johnny's group never gets to go outside and play? They're always doing those scripted lessons. That's part of that too, and teachers get mad, So a lot of times what teachers want to do, instead of doing those scripted lessons, they want to grade papers that their colleagues got to go on break or got to go outside or go to a special or an elective, and they got to go back and reteach that lesson again to this bunch of, booger readers. They got to figure out a different way to teach this lesson. And so this whole intervention, EC, this whole module is about how you can, you can be smarter and try to facilitate. And instead of ignoring it and putting it off someplace in your building where you can't see it, it's you embracing it and making it work for everybody that you can make it work for. Again, we need to be champions for all kids. We need to be champions. And although it's hard to find, but you get angry at parents, but you know that they're just advocating for their kids. Now, a lot of times inappropriately, but that's what they're doing. But you need to be a champion for the kids in your building, and that means you need to embrace your intervention program and understand it and know what you can do to help it and support it and make it better. And the same with your exceptional children's program. Know what they're supposed to get and whether they're getting it or not. What can you do to help schedule it, move it, change their special schedule, whatever you can do to make it work better, hire better teachers, support them more. Whatever it takes to do that. If you can control this part, if you can get a handle on this part of your school organization, well, I'm telling you, 95% of your problems will go away. 95% of your parent complaints and problems will go away if you can get a handle on this. If you don't, it'll eat you up. You'll either whip it or it'll whip you, one or the other. You will not ignore this. It will not go away. It is the 800-pound gorilla sitting on the sofa every day in your office. You will not have a day where this does not, where you can just not have to think about this. This will be an everyday thing. This will be an everyday thing. All right. So let's share our screen here. Okay, what I've got for you under Jen's hotspots, she was the EC person. Let me close some of this stuff. It's asking me to do that. Close that. We can close that one. Save. All right, this was from 2006, 10 million kids today live with special needs. There's twice that many now, it'd be 20 million. It's doubled in the last 16 years, mostly from identification. Remember, Education of Children Act from 75, least restrictive environment. Y'all know what that means. Civil rights of special needs kids, IDEA, free and appropriate education evaluations only take place to help student placement and services IEP will develop for each EC student. And parents are encouraged to hold an active role in developing the IEP. So when you do your response to the IEP meeting that you're supposed to sit in on the next week or so, what I'm going to say to you is, and it sounds very simplistic. Well, you've already figured out I'm a pretty simple person. That regardless of who does the paperwork, that all the decisions have to be collaborative. That sounds pretty simple, but I'm telling you, that's a fight. That is a fight. You have EC teachers. And remember, there has to be a LEA representative, either you or one of your APs have to be in the room with them. Now, see, the problem is it becomes territorial. Your EC teachers did all that work and all that paperwork, and they're married to that. And then the parents say, I don't like that, don't want that. And then it becomes what the EC teacher hears is you don't want me, you don't like me. You don't appreciate all this hard work I've done for your sniveling brat. And then it becomes a fist fight. So the important thing is, regardless who does all the paperwork, decisions have to be collaborative. That's the law. And parents want to have a say so in what happens now. But now on the other end of that, teachers are unreasonable because it's on the other end that parents are unreasonable as well. To be completely unfeeling like I usually am. I've seen parents of kids who, if their IQ had been 2 points less, they'd have been a stump or some inanimate object like a bar of soap, and wanted, and did not want them placed. They didn't want to get their kids any help. I don't think they all that. I think he's just lazy. No, he don't. Look at him. He can't. He's mostly nonverbal, can't read. I mean, got all these issues, but parents just don't want to acknowledge that. That's the same. It's become. When I was a principal, it was that. Now that has become the autism dodge. Well, he's just autistic. Put him in the autism. No, autistic. Those kids are higher functioning. They're above average. And so what parents want, we want you to not stigmatize this child. We want this special thing for this child. We want something completely inappropriate. We don't care that you're the professional and you realize that this child's not autistic. They're mentally handicapped or mentally disabled. Their IQ, they've got a functional IQ of 45. That does not make them autistic. They're nonverbal because they're mentally disabled, not because they're autistic. And so it's a fight. A lot of times it becomes a fight. But again, you've got to know that regardless, as the LEA rep, you can't just say, well, they wrote this up, this is what we got to do. No, it has to be a collaborative decision. Now, and as an LEA rep as well, it's very important, this audit that you've done. There's Alex over there. This audit that Alex talked about early on in class tonight, part of the reason why we do this audit as well is we know what services we can offer. One of the things that you'll be asked to do as the LEA rep sometimes is parents will say, well, what about this? Well, you've got to know if we do that or not. I mean, one of the things that you know not to offer homebound. That's very expensive, and somebody above your pay level has to make that call. But you need to know what we do have and what we do offer, so that you can enter into a intelligent conversation with these parents when they don't agree with what you're recommending for them, because they're all going to turn and look at you. You're kind of the referee here. The LEA rep is kind of the referee between what the staff wants and what the parent wants. And that's going to be your role as an AP or a principal or both. So you better understand how this works, what the law is, and what the possibilities are of what you can offer. Now, I'm probably preaching to the choir tonight. Y'all are a pretty advanced group, but this is stuff you need to hear again. that this is something you cannot ignore. You better embrace it. You better learn all that you can about it. Let me share my screen. What's Angie excited about? You dog?
My big dog has been like in my lap, and she moved her big paw. She's 151 pounds, and she
Wow.
moved her paw, and like my Chromebook came crashing down. I
Oh.
wasn't ready. She's like laying on my arm right now.
Oh. What kind of dog is that?
She's a Mastador. She's a Mastiff and Lab mix.
Oh,
Yeah.
I need me one of them. The other thing, the last thing that I have tonight is my top 10 of, this is a top 10 of problem areas, legal problem areas, things that you can back into that you weren't aware of as a classroom teacher. So here are my top 10. These are things you generally didn't know. No Child Left Behind has two functions: low performing, you know what that is on the academic. It also has persistently dangerous. We're going to cover that. Most folks don't know that that statute is in there. I'm going to cover that when we do discipline, about, you know, the bad things that can happen to you as a school administrator if you have too many of these bad things happen on your campus. The ones with the stars count against you. The second thing is empower school and disciplinary data reporting. You have to report all law people. Again, teachers, emerging administrators don't know that you have to report all incidents, regardless of what you did to the students. And you get called out when Office of Civil Rights finds out that you're not reporting all incidents, and or you're not reporting the things to law enforcement that you're supposed to. Prayer can't be led by staff or mandated by staff, but it can, student can do it. That's one of those things. Again, teachers don't know. Student dress and publications can be regulated by school administrators to avoid school disruption. That is a common misconception. Search and seizure. There's a different standard for school staff than there are for police. It's reasonable suspicion versus probable cause. Strip searches aren't permitted by school personnel. Zero tolerance policies are not legal. That's one that we get caught in on our first case study. Teachers don't know that there's such a thing as zero tolerance. That's from the Office of Civil Rights. Abuse, neglect, harassment must be supported to school and law enforcement. Most of you know that. They've been pretty good lately about telling teachers you got to report this stuff. But this one right here, I highlighted it for tonight. FERPA. Can't talk about kids. I was at Metro School. I was over doing principal evaluation and doing an audit over there, and I heard teacher assistants in the faculty lounge talking about kids. That's a no-no. Can't do those kinds of things. And so that's one of those, again, that jumps up and gets you, that people don't know about. You can't be discussing these kids, even in a private conversation between two teachers in a class. If anybody could overhear it, that's against the law. We've talked about due process. Most people don't understand the difference of substantive and procedural. Substance is, what does the law say? And then how did you carry it out? And then we talked about arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary, singling out certain students and not others. Capricious, more punishment than is allowed by law or board policy. So those are the kind of things that we touch on that the regular classroom or the uninitiated don't know about. The two that, again, most specific to tonight are, everybody knows most of EC stuff, but zero tolerance for our first case study, and then FERPA about who can hear information on kids, who can talk about kids, what can be shared about kids. All of those things is covered under the FERPA law, and there is a link to it right here. I made sure it is now working. I would encourage you to go into this folder and look at some of these different things that are in there. I can close a couple of these. I would also, in preparation for our class in 2 weeks. I covered this mostly tonight, the EC discipline for EC and 504 kids, what you have to do. And it speaks to that, the 10 days, it speaks to any movement that's changing placement. It speaks to what the manifestation is, all the things that have to occur, the manifestation, the functional behavior assessment, the updated psychological and the updated IAP. It's all of that is in this slideshow as well. For disciplining exceptional children, we'll cover, we'll refer back to this when we get there in a couple of weeks and do our discipline module. But again, these are real life documents that the two principals that I work with in this course have uploaded for me to share with you. You have similar ones in Gaston County, but that's what's in there. All right. What have I missed tonight? What do you want to know? What have we not talked about exceptional children, our case study, our evidence, our weekly, what we've got to do for our weekly assignment? What have I missed? What gaps do we have in your learning that you need to know about? The only thing I can say is y'all need to talk more.
I do have, actually, do you have some time after class? That's my
do.
first question. Okay, I have a couple of questions after class, but I have one. This came up last week. During the summer camps, we are supposed, or I am, I'm sure many of us are supposed to observe classroom teachers and do walkthroughs.
Mm-hmm.
And you had mentioned the walkthrough training.
Yeah.
Is that, will we need to have completed that walkthrough training in order to do that summer camp thing?
As long as they're not making you do formal observations, you'll be okay.
Okay.
If you're just doing walkthroughs, you're all right. Now you need to take a form. Does Gaston County have a walkthrough form?
I think they are providing us something. Yeah.
I know they have one for regular classroom. I'm guessing they'll have one for you for the summer as well. When you walk through, they'll have a checklist of things for you to do. No, as long as it's 15 minutes or less, you don't have to be certified to do observations. That's why it's called a walkthrough. But now if you stay more than 15 minutes, you better be certified if you stay more than 15 minutes. Again, we're talking about due process. Teachers get due process as well, and you can't stay more than 15 unless you're certified to do that. And then write them. If you stay more than 15, you can't write up that you can't do that walkthrough form because it becomes an official observation if it's more than 15 minutes. So, wear a watch. I know I see Wood's got his on. I know many millennials don't wear a watch now. If you need one, I'll loan you one. You need to wear a watch. And no, don't stay but 15 minutes. If you stay longer than that, it becomes a formal observation, and you're not certified to do that. Don't stir up that hornet's nest. So that's why they told you to do walkthroughs. Walkthroughs are 10 to 15, maximum 15. Some districts put a limit at 12, so you can't go over the 15. Again, we have to follow the law.
I'm glad I asked that then.
Yeah. Now, if you want to go stay 30 minutes, but you can't turn in a evaluative form on it if you stay 30 minutes. If you enjoy their class and want to be there and see what's going on, that's fine. But if to write it up, you got to stay less than 15. Do we have anybody who's certified to do observations yet? I didn't think so. I'm going to twist our arms if I can't get that done before y'all get through. I really want y'all to come out of this program with that already done. And so I'm hoping we can get that done next semester. Dr. Balknight is not going to teach y'all next semester. We've got somebody else who's going to. And so that may help us get y'all trained. There's another person in the C&I department they want to teach y'all next semester. And I may coach for them. That'd be ugly, wouldn't it? Me. But yeah, she has decided that she wants somebody else to teach y'all next semester. And I'm hoping that means that she will then train y'all or have y'all trained to do observations. That would be good. Y'all need that. Other questions you got? Other concerns? Other issues?
I don't really have a question. Just a comment when we were talking about exceptional children and how the regular ed teacher sometimes has to serve as the LEA. One of the things that I find to be very challenging is because we're doing more inclusion, having EC teachers write the goals for the EC children that regular ed teachers are supposed to carry out.
To follow, yes.
Right, without any consideration for how many of these students you actually have in your classroom.
Right.
Like I received a child who really should have been placed in the SAC class this year.
Yeah.
Parents want that. So he came to me with 16 goals.
No.
And he was one of 4 children with an IEP. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what the hey?
Yeah.
So we have to immediately have a meeting to like decrease the number of goals. But I'm thinking, how is this good for children? Like this, just because parents don't want what is best for him.
Exactly.
I mean, he kicked and screamed through stuff. Like there was nothing we could do but suffer the whole year. And that really impaired the learning in our classroom. I mean,
well, of course it does. That's why I said those regular ed parents have a legitimate beef.
They really do. And the teachers do too. And the teachers
Yes.
are just kind of told to live through it and make sure you follow these, document your, that you're trying to make sure you're meeting the goals, keep the documentation. And I'm thinking there would need to be 3 of me to document for 16
Yeah.
goals for y'all.
But you see, your LEA rep threw you under the bus.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, your LEA rep is there to make sure that there's some equity on both sides. I hate the word fair. Fair's place you go in the fall of the year, get a corn dog and ride the Ferris wheel. There's no such thing fair in adult life. But the whole point of the LEA rep, the assistant principal is there's some fundamental equity there. We can't just let parents, because they want that, your child doesn't qualify for that. They need this. And sometimes you may have to go to, arbitration or may have to go to court, but we can't, your child needs to be over here in this. We can't just put them in the room and let them tear that room up for everybody else. And then put 16 goals down for a teacher when the 4 should be the most. We can't do, that's why I'm referring to that LEA person has to be the person who does that. That should be you. But you need to know what we offer, what we can't offer. We don't offer that in that room. We can't have a teacher do 16 goals. That's why you got to get in this. If you're going to be the LEA rep and you will as assistant principal and maybe even as a principal some, you got to get in this. You got to know what's going on. You can't throw teachers like Daphne under the bus. You can't disrupt that room. Then you're going to have those regular ed parents in there roasting you every day, as they ought to. As they ought to. And so that's what we're talking about. This is real life, folks. This is how it works for reals. This is not something that you read in the book. This is how this works for real. The whole purpose of this course is to keep you from losing your house, but to know how you actually run school. Not what's in a textbook, but how you actually run school and what's important and how you have to do these things. And so that's what we're talking about. That's exactly. So dig into this week and talk with your EC people, talk with your intervention person, dig into this thing this week and learn as much as you can and know what you don't know. That's what's important. Y'all need to talk more as we, you need to contribute more as you learn more what we're doing. Now, next week, y'all gonna talk the whole time until I blow my gasket and yell and scream and throw stuff. If you don't get it right, but next week, y'all get to talk. It's your night. I'm gonna turn it on and y'all get to go. All right. I'll see you next week. Everybody be safe.
Dr. Lamb, can I stay over just a minute
Yes.
too? Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna pause my recording and stay over.